Good afternoon. I'm Pastor Jessica of the famous ziti-making congregation down the Isthmus. Yes, and I'm so grateful to be with you all this afternoon. I told one of our colleagues that somebody should probably put some pomp in this circumstance, so I hope you don't mind I overdressed for the occasion. About a year ago, our families had a lot to sort out. Niato and his wife Haley and my husband David and I were both expecting babies. And I remember one conversation clearly with Haley, maybe by text, maybe over ice cream, maybe both, when we groaned about all we had to do and all the decisions we had to make. Like how to find childcare and figure out how in the world we would trust a total stranger with the person we had not met yet, but knew we would love more than anyone else in the whole world. There was all this stuff to buy, like onesies. How many do you need? Or swaddles, like what is a swaddle and how do you learn to do that? And the assembly, all of the assembly required, bassinets and bouncers and baby monitors. And in the mix of all those very practical concerns, there were other decisions to make. Ones that began to require an outsized amount of time and consideration in those already very full days, like what to paint or stick over the wall, over the crib, where the baby would eventually sleep in like 6 months or 9 months or 2 years. We don't even know. Still don't know. Sure, people told us that things like that didn't have to be figured out right away, that babies can't see past their noses for a good long while. But try telling that to expectant parents. Think about it. Doesn't it matter a whole lot what image a newborn infant will first see when those eyes do focus on something further away than their nose? These days, research tells us that new babies can most easily see images that are high contrast, like think big black and white figures with a bold outline. And of course, they see the color and the contrast, and then they see the boundaries of the figure. And if there's more than one figure, later they begin to see where one figure stops and the other begins. And then later, a baby can discern that there's a relationship between those two figures. And if there's many figures, then maybe a pattern of relationships between the figures. So I lay awake for weeks, unable to sleep in the final stretch of my pregnancy, trying to figure out what image we should put above the baby's crib. Not because the kid would see and understand like right away, but it would be the first thing they would see. And every time they'd wake up, they'd see it. And when they would fall asleep in the middle of the night and wake themselves up and wonder if they were alone, that's what they would look at. And as their minds developed all these new ways of understanding the world, they'd see the world through that one image. I mean, Niato didn't have this problem. I'm sure he did not lie awake thinking about this, but I did. I thought, what one image do I want this kid to have in their head so clearly? The question of what image we would have in the form of a peel and stick wall sticker began to take on existential dimensions. Like, would they begin feeling and sensing themselves and the world through this image? How can we know, right? So of course, I scrolled endlessly through Amazon and Etsy and Facebook and all kinds of other places. And you can imagine the choices. There were nature themes. You can turn your nursery into a mountain range or a tropical island, a jungle, or an English garden. There were animal themes. You can surround your baby with farm animals, puppy dogs, fish, birds, dinosaurs. And as you can imagine, there were lots of themes with sports ball and engines, like dump trucks and backhoes and race cars and trains and airplanes and even container ships. Can you imagine deciding that the first image your baby should see is like a container ship full of cell phones, Gap t-shirts, and Tupperware? I could not. And no shade if that's what you decided. I mean, it's okay. And I couldn't even really get on board with a nursery full of giant ferns and dinosaurs, no matter how much I know kids love dinosaurs. I couldn't get on board with my son's first and lasting vision being one of extinction. I wanted to give my son a vision that would comfort him, a vision that might teach him, however implicitly, about something he can count on, however long he lives, something that would endure his whole life long. So naturally, I went with a wall sticker of 4 moomins huddled on a branch. What is a moomin, you ask? I didn't know either until the vast world of the internet opened before me at 3 a.m. one night. Moomins are magical creatures from a Finnish story world called Moominland, of course. They look like plump little babies, actually, with enormous heads and Buddha bellies and tiny arms and legs. There's a whole storyland about them, books and movies and short stories and comic books and a TikTok channel, I found out. I haven't watched or read any of that because that's not really the point, and I don't really need to know anything about moomins other than the fact that in this one wall sticker, there are 4 of them huddled closely together on a branch with their faces turned toward one another, arms outstretched, looking happy to be together. You'd be surprised. There are very few wall stickers that depict any kind of relationship. There are lots of lonely Pooh Bears sitting with their hands in a honey pot and owls somewhere up here in a tree. But for my son's first and guiding image for his youngest years, I wanted him to look up from that crib when he wakes up in the middle of the night and remember that he is not alone, and that the singular, most true thing about the world is love. Adults need these kinds of visions too, you know. We're not infants. It's been a long time since we saw anything for the first time. And that's our challenge, actually. We've seen or experienced so very much. And I do want to broaden the metaphor because even if we are not sighted, the larger truth remains. Since our birth, we've been inundated with images, songs, stories, and they add up, crowding our hearts and minds and souls with more than we can possibly integrate or process. Just take me as an example. In 10 seconds, earlier this weekend, I scrolled through my social feed and saw 10 images. A friend's daughter on the beach, a helicopter delivering supplies in Appalachia, an ad for baby toys, bombed out buildings in Lebanon, a young friend's wedding, a firefighter who died trying to save a family in the hurricane, church friends hiking in Colorado, an ad for an online workout subscription, a colleague's new job announcement, and Taylor Swift's endorsement of Kamala Harris for president. What am I supposed to do with all of that in 10 seconds? And then my baby cries like it's gone. And get this, I've been alive for 1.2 billion seconds. Now, it's only been 545 million seconds since the iPhone came out, but you get the picture. Live long enough, and we adults find ourselves in desperate need of a kind of singular vision to help it all make sense. The Apostle Paul understood this, even though he lived 62 billion seconds before the iPhone. We might have an outsized challenge as people of the modern digital age, but it's rooted in something fundamentally human. What matters in the end? Does anything hold all of this together? What will give my life meaning? When we lie awake with 1,000 things running through our minds, we can start to lose the thread. The Apostle Paul knew his fledgling church people in Corinth struggled with similar things. Corinth was one of the largest cities in ancient Greece, about the population of UW-Madison, actually, students and staff all together. And it was on a bustling trade route, land and sea, commerce and government, religious and education, all bustling around. People came and went all the time. New ideas bubbled and passed. People tested and tried philosophies and prophecies. Even governments and militaries rose and fell around them. It was a diverse city with people from many different cultures and many different values all together. And you can bet there were power struggles and lots of economic disparity, people who stepped over others to get to the top, and those who lived perennially on the outside and underside of whatever regime or thought wave came and went. And the people of the Corinthian church were not immune from all of this. These kinds of waves rocked people in the young Christian community of which they were a part. The Apostle Paul had founded this baby church and left it to grow while he went to tend to another baby church in the city of Ephesus. And it was from there that he heard rumors that this church in Corinth was struggling to find their footing. Rumor had it that people were arguing over everything, from how to celebrate the Lord's Supper to whether small business owners could attend a corporate dinner where they'd be served meat that had been previously sacrificed to idols. And people. So people were willing to go to blows over everything, and the divisions were starting to isolate people from each other. And people needed to be isolated from each other as much then as they do now. Well, Paul must have realized that this young church needed a vision through which to interpret everything else so that they'd have a way to respond and not just react. So he said this: "If I speak in the tongue of humans and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love never ends. Everything else will. 3 things will remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Love never ends. Love. Love is the vision. Love is what matters. Love is what holds it all together. Love is what gives your life and your work meaning. It's love, because love never ends." When the Apostle Paul needed to stick to something and stick it on the wall over the Corinthian church cradle, he chose a vision of love. And the early church took this image and ran with it. Most people, when you ask them what one image they associate with the Christian church, what do you think they say? Go ahead. Yeah. The cross, right. And that's not a bad image. That's an important image. But this image wasn't the singular or central image of the church before the Middle Ages. The most popular depiction of Jesus in the early church was that of him as a child at his mother's breast. Mary and child in an embrace of love, inviting the beholder to enter in and share in that love. Scriptures say that God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. So why wouldn't an image of love be the guiding image through which we understand and filter all the other fragments and partial puzzle pieces of life? It can be so wildly hard some days to know what to do in response to all we experience, how to organize our lives and our days in a way that matters. Do I add myself to the Saturday work schedule or offer some time to volunteer? Do I spend 4 more hours today buttoning up my career or investing in a friendship? Do I make sure my partner understands what I'm trying to tell them, or do I ask more questions to learn about their perspective? Do I throw myself behind a political candidate or veil my vote in hopes of keeping the peace with my family? Every day, the stuff of life demands that we make split-second decisions about all of these things. And if we don't have any larger vision about what life is or where it's heading, what matters in the end, we can be easily overwhelmed and tossed by the waves of chaos and pushed to do things that end up being really contrary to our values. The Apostle Paul rightly wrote that now, every day, we see only a reflection, as in a mirror. But there will come a day when we see face to face. Now we know in part, then we will know fully, even as we have been fully known. And yet we can and do have a sense of what we will see when we see face to face, what we will know in the fullness of time. And what we will know is love. The face we will see is the face of love. When I was ordained, my seminary field education supervisor gave me a gift, and I've hung it on my wall everywhere I've gone since. And believe it or not, it is a high contrast, paper cutout, dark blue on white, of Jesus and a woman sitting face to face at a well. I don't know if you know this story, but it's a beautiful one. Jesus hikes out of town and into a village where Samaritans live. And Samaritans were essentially cousins of all the people who lived in Nazareth and Bethlehem and Jerusalem, but they'd been cut off from each other by the comings and goings of military occupations, and their spiritual lives, their religious lives had evolved in different direction. There's another story you may know, right? The Good Samaritan. That's meant to be an ironic title because the people for whom it was spoken didn't think there was such a thing as a Good Samaritan. Well, that's why Jesus hiked out of town and up the hill where the Samaritans lived, because Jesus thought it was time for that separation and enmity to end. He bumped into a woman at a well and asked her for water, and she reminded him that the people wouldn't think well of him if he drank that water with her, but he insisted. And they drank from the same cup. And Jesus said, there will be a day when we worship on the same mountain in spirit and in truth. There will be a day when love brings even us back together. This is the vision I hang on my wall. A vision of love. A vision that the world desperately needs right now. A vision that I need when I wake up every day and wonder how in the world to respond to the violence and division and suffering I see. I look at the vision of love. Because in the end, it will endure. In a world of endless visions, there are only a few with the power to wake us up every morning, comfort us in the deepest nights of our souls, and fill every day in between with meaning and direction that will last. But there is something that these visions all have in common, whether it's Mary holding infant Jesus, or Jesus with the woman at the well, or 4 Moomins sitting in a tree. It's love. It's love, and it always will be. So, Niato and all my new friends, find a vision of love that calls to you and put it above your cradle, beside your kitchen table, in sight of where you work. And remember, love never fails, and it will always lead you home. Amen.